And to that end, we're going to start with the invocation. I believe I saw, actually, you know what? Sue Evenwell, would you be willing to lead us in invocation? Oh, sorry. We both went to unmute you at the same time. There
How's
you go.
that? How's that? Sure. Bow your heads with me. Heavenly Father, most gracious Lord, sovereign God, we give you thanks and praise for your goodness to each one of us, your faithfulness to us through this particular COVID crisis that each one of our communities have gone through. And I ask you to continue to bless our communities as we work our way through it. We open Texas to restore our economy and to our populations that are unemployed to get them back to work. Father, tonight we have things to discuss that are very important. So I ask you to give us clarity and discernment in making the decisions that will be important for our entire party. Bless all those who are in attendance tonight, and we ask it in Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you. And then if you'll join me in saying the pledges. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And then the Texas flag. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible. Okay, and yeah, thank you. A couple of people have made comments. There is a lot of bad weather all over Texas tonight. That could mean that any one of us could lose our could lose our signal at pretty much any time. If I lose my signal, if Vice Chair Alma Jackson is on, she would be next to continue chair. Oh, I see her. There we go. Then she would be next to just take over chairing the meeting. And Brandon, if you would make sure that she's also set as a co-host, so she could do that if necessary. And I hope that everyone is safe and healthy and well. We will now go on to establish the roll. Without objection, I appoint Jan Duncan, David Covey, and Terry Harper to a proxy committee with Jan Duncan as chair. Hearing no objection, the proxy committee is appointed. Given the limitations of electronic meeting, please feel free to conduct your business in the chat if necessary. Including myself and Vice Chair Alma Jackson, there are 64 members of the SREC. The proxy committee, if you would go ahead and begin your work while our secretary, Josh Flynn, calls the roll. Josh, if you would, please call the roll.
Thank you, Chairman. James Dickey.
Here.
Alma Jackson. Tony Ann DeShiel.
Alma and Tony Ann both waved in case.
I am here.
Okay.
in case you were wondering.
Thank you. Dr. Robert Armstrong. Howell. Neil Dibbs checked in. Larry Hicks. Wade Emmert. Trey Trainer.
Actually, you know,
Art
we should
Martinez.
remove Trey from the list because he's now received his appointment to the Federal Elections Commission and had that confirmed.
Very good. Assistant General Counsel Art Martinez de Vera. Corey Tabor. Sue Evenwell.
Sue's present.
Robert Kessig.
She has
Sue's
his
got
proxy.
Yeah, I got the proxy. Jerry Fisher. Jason Ross,
He's present.
Judy Parada, David Covey,
He is present.
Allison Winter, Walter West, Nita Davidson, Mike McCloskey, Dawn McDonald, Chris McDonald, Mark Ramsey, Terry.
Everybody,
Lee
sorry,
Oaks.
I changed the settings so you now can unmute yourselves to be. So if you're further in the role, get ready. But
I'm
but
gonna
yeah,
I'm gonna start back. I'm gonna start back at SD4. I've got everybody before SD4 present. So Allison Winter,
Here.
Walter West,
Present and accounted for.
Nita Davidson,
Here.
Mike McCloskey, Dawn McDonald,
Here.
Chris McDonald,
Here.
Mark Ramsey,
Here.
Terry Leos Wilson, Susan Fisher, Chuck Branch, and Giphart,
Here.
Steve Atwell, Susan Wright,
Here.
Warren Norred,
Here.
Tanya Robertson,
Here.
JT Edwards,
Present.
Jill Glover, has a proxy with David Halverson. David Halverson,
Here. I'm here. Here.
I'm here.
okay,
And I'm
David's
here.
here too.
I got you. Don Elliott,
Here.
Roy Morales,
Here.
Jan Duncan,
Here.
Fernando Trevino,
Here.
Gail Stannard,
I'm here. Thank you.
Virgil Cruz,
I'm here.
Susan Fountain,
I'm here.
Randall Dunning,
Here.
Kathleen Wall,
Be here by proxy. This is Marvin Cleed.
Marvin Cleed here.
Yes.
Here.
David Luther,
Present.
Marion Knowlton,
Here.
Robert Casillas, Hannah Scott,
Here.
Samuel Dalton,
Here.
Carla Sisk,
Present.
Terry Harper,
I'm here.
Ashley Sellers, proxy Gary Teal,
Here.
Sam Tripp Bryant,
Here.
Leslie
He-
Thompson.
he's
Thomas.
here.
Yes, got it. Leslie Thomas. Stefan Broden. Summer Wise.
Leslie said she was here by proxy.
She said she's here and Broden's here by proxy.
Gotcha.
Oh, okay.
Summer Wise is here.
Summer Wise. Okay. Jack Barcroft. Linda Kinney.
Here.
Mark Dorazio.
Here.
Arian Stanko,
Present.
Michael Rain, Morgan Graham,
Present.
James Zavaleta, Neva Haney,
He's here.
Drew Bullard,
Here.
Barbara Carrasco,
Here.
Mark Dunham,
Here.
Dion Starnes,
Here.
Britton Brooks,
Here.
Rhonda Lacey,
Here by proxy.
Tom Roller.
Here.
Chairman, we have a
Josh,
Chairman,
this
we-
is Glenn McCloskey, SD5. I'm here.
Thank you.
Josh.
Chairman, we have a quorum.
Great.
And
Thank
anybody
you.
else that I missed on the roll, please text me on the voice chat, or not the voice chat.
Michael Wayne is here in 26. See, his phone dropped.
Okay, very good.
Excellent.
I'm here.
Okay, at this time, RPT Organization Director Brandon Moore will take a moment to go over your packets.
Good evening, folks. Glad y'all are here. I'm going to share my screen right quick, as you should be able to see here. We are in the Google Drive. If you find the RPT folder in your Google Drive, then in that, go to your RPT staff and SREC folder in there. From there, you'll go to SREC meetings, then select the year 2020. And then today's meeting, for this one, it's electronic meeting, May 27, 2020. And then on that one, you'll see the digital packet 5/27/2020. In there, we have the proxies in a folder, the amended agenda, which was sent out yesterday, the original agenda, along with the audit committee letter and the financial statements. That's what you should find in your folders there. If you have any questions, please let me know, and thank you much.
Great. Thank you, Brandon. I'll give the audit committee another moment unless they're already set. Okay. Being that this is a special meeting, sorry, go ahead.
We're good, James, whenever you're ready.
Okay, go right ahead.
Hi, everyone. You should have received a copy of the audit. And
Oh, sorry. Yeah, look, sorry, Tom. Give me just a sec. I'll get to you in just a sec.
Okay.
Sorry, Jan.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I show 7 proxies that we have.
Excellent. Mr. Flynn, does that match up? You're good on those?
Yes, sir. Got them all.
Great. Thank you very much. If any of you need to leave the meeting, then Secretary Flynn has proxy forms, and please notify him and Chairwoman Duncan of the proxy committee so that they can make sure that's reflected properly in the minutes. Being this a special meeting, the only business eligible to come before us is that which was noticed with the call of the meeting. That business is to consider and vote on RPT rules changes noticed with the call for this meeting, and to hear the report of the audit committee, which that will be coming up. Let me give just a brief recap of a couple of things before we begin. First of all, the Legislative Priorities Temporary Convention Chairman, Mark Ramsey, has agreed to head up the working group to review and take on the effort to define and frame essential versus non-essential state budget items. We've been hearing a lot about essential and non-essential work lately, and it's time that we apply that same standard to government as well. That'll be a very important initiative, and I appreciate Mr. Ramsey being willing to take that on. Our annual audit has come back. You're going to hear the report from Chairman Roller. I've had a chance to discuss it briefly with him. The audit reported the state of the RPT is financially sound and in good financial health. And this is the fourth audit executed since I have become RPT chair. Usually there would only be once a year, so there would have been 3, but notoriously we had to go through the expense of an extra review following the claims on the convention floor in 2018, which were fortunately proven unfounded with the report that the RPT had to do extra that year. I'm very proud of our accounting teams that have worked tirelessly and diligently in managing our finances with such precision. With the president and vice president within an hour or two of each other, both mentioning Texas yesterday morning as an option should North Carolina not see through their commitment to hold the RNC National Convention, we have had busy days in the press shop responding to inquiries. As I said on Fox and Friends this morning, and as we can personally attest, it is no easy feat to move any convention, and I would strongly encourage North Carolina to proceed with hosting our national convention. Should it not, however, which I still believe to be a very remote possibility, we have extended the invitation, and we have received a lot of calls from facilities around the state and people who would love to help make that a reality. Speaking of conventions, we are coming up on our 4th weekend of county and senatorial district conventions this coming weekend. It is our 4th, as you will note that some did hold their conventions on the original date of March 21st. I'm hearing really good reports from all those that have been held and all those who have attended. Mr. DeRazio had, for example, a great one that had over 125 people at it on Saturday. So now, let's do a brief update on the planning and progress of our state convention, and then we will do the audit report. So Kyle, if you could provide a few remarks about how the convention planning is going. Kyle? Actually, I see that he's on, but on the connection he's on, I don't see audio. Let me check here. Okay. Kyle, give him another second. And if not, I tell you what, let's go to, pardon, there you are.
I am here. I apologize. I was disconnected. The storm kind of messed me up here a little bit. So are we looking for a convention update? I just jumped
Yeah,
back on.
sorry. If you could just give a brief overview on status on state convention, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, sorry about getting knocked off there for a little bit. As the chairman alluded to, there was a little bit of a weather situation out here. So we are full steam ahead on convention. You know, we've got a fair number of delegates already signed up, even with the limited amount of Senate district and county conventions we've got so far. And although there are still rooms available to carry out right now, and we are planning on another release of those rooms in June. So registration is going well as far as planning of the convention. We are continuing to work with the convention center on plans for making sure that everybody is safe and everybody can, be as distant as they feel like they need to be from people that around them, depending on what the situation is looking like in July. So we are planning the General Assembly, the general meeting, to have a little bit of extra space for all of the Senate district and congressional meetings, so that people who want to be, separated or can be. The SD caucus and congressional district caucuses. We are looking at also making sure that there's a little bit more space in there. As you all know, those are the meetings that tend to be more confined and restricted. So it is taking quite an effort on behalf of the convention center staff as well as our arrangements committee folks to see if we can rearrange things to allow for caucuses that are a little bit roomier. That may cause some things to be moved around a little bit and some extra spaces to be utilized. But we just want to make sure that everybody's as comfortable as possible coming to the convention. So we plan on getting a little bit more detail about that tomorrow. But just rest assured that everything is full steam ahead, and we've got a very cooperative convention center staff and a very cooperative Convention and Visitors Bureau staff working with us to make sure that they can accommodate everything that we need for our convention in July.
That's great. Anybody have any question for Kyle before we move on? Okay. Then if we could go to Mr. Roller and the audit report. Tom? I hope we didn't lose him due to the weather.
Chairman, I'm not seeing him in the list anymore.
I am not either. That is unfortunate. So, but it is what it is. All right. So, Mr. Flynn, Mr. Atwell noted that he is present, and so we will move on. Hopefully, Mr. Roller will be back with us. Brandon, if you'll just keep an eye out and let me know when he is back with us, I'd appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
Okay. While we, rather than wait for Mr. Roller, we'll come back to him later. And in the meantime, now it is time to deal with the rules changes that were noticed. The first rules change was adding an RPT Rule 19A, permitting electronic precinct conventions in the event of a stated emergency as declared by the county chairman or state chairman. A precinct convention may be conducted through use of electronic meeting services designated by the county chairman. Short and simple. Is there a motion? I will now entertain a motion. Mr. McCloskey has moved adoption of that rule.
Second.
Is there a second?
Second.
Great. There's a second. So there's a motion and a second. Any discussion? I see Mrs. Robertson, you have your hand up.
Sir, Mr. Chairman, Tanya Robertson, SD 11. Point of inquiry. Were there any discussions about, number one, the definition of emergency? Everybody has their different opinions of what that is, and I think we discussed that on a couple of meetings back at length. And so with that being said, was there any discussion in the working group that came up with this change that the only person to call this meeting, this emergency meeting, would be the county chairman? Was there discussion about another check and balance, like somebody else, say the state party chair? Make it an and instead of an R.
I can respond to that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Howe, if you would.
So the intent of adding that clause there is simply to discourage these being held by electronic meetings because they are difficult to maintain everyone's rights, but not get in the way of local precincts getting their work done, or local counties ensuring that every precinct can have a convention. The language being proposed is rather in line with how the SREC has taken the other steps on electronic meetings thus far, is to be as hands-off as possible for this. And so the clause is only there to try to discourage it. but still leave it within the hands of the local party. Because it would be ordinarily it would be the county executive committee setting the time, place, and date of the precinct conventions. But because they may not be able to meet themselves to do so, which is why it's being given to the county chairman. And the state chairman is there in case there is no county chairman or county chairman fails to ever call precinct conventions.
Okay, so there wasn't discussion about adding another, and I'm going to say this is, I guess, we've all experienced situations where when one person has that kind of authority with no recourse, things, could go very wrong. And that's why I was asking if there was any talk about having just another layer of accountability.
It is open for amendment. We had discussed it and we're just following the direction the SREC has given thus far on control over electronic meetings. We had no actual preference in that regard. We're just trying to put language in front of y'all that we assumed would be along the lines of how the SRC has reacted thus far. Certainly can have other language in there if you prefer checks and balances, but keep in mind there are 8,100 precincts in Texas. Whenever check and balance could get quite administratively exhaustive.
I understand that.
Great.
So with that said, Mr. Chairman, is it in order for me to make a motion for an amendment?
Absolutely.
Okay, I would like to strike or and replace it with and in the middle of county chairman and state chairman.
Okay, there is a motion for amendment. Is there a second?
Walter West, second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Any discussion on the amendment? The amendment is to require that I also concur with the declaration of the emergency and calling the electronic precinct chair meetings for a given county.
Roy Morales, SD 13.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to make an amendment to the amendment.
Okay, the amendment's really tight, so I'm not sure if it'll be within scope, but go for it.
This particular rule is going to be is very similar to the next one we discuss. And the way I read it is that the two parties right now that can declare that there's an emergency area is the county chair and the RPT chair. I believe the only person that can call an emergency is the governor, and it should be the governor's call on this. Shouldn't be the RP chair, should not be the county chair. Neither one have the experience in this area. The governor has many assets that can give him, yes, this is a disaster, or no, it's not a disaster. And I believe it's opening a can of worms by doing this. That's why I would like to replace both those county chair and RP chair to the governor of the state of Texas.
Yeah, I appreciate this. So I guess first of all, you were framing it as an amendment to the amendment, but your amendment would not actually be an amendment to her word, and it would be striking a lot more than that. So it actually would be outside the scope, I believe, of an amendment to the amendment. So hold on to that idea, and I'll call on you after that. also just for discussion purposes, in case I'm wrong on how I'm thinking of this, I'm not reading this that either as originally written, talking about a county chairman or the state chairman, that we were declaring a disaster, but that we were declaring that there was enough of an emergency that it justified having an electronic precinct convention. That may have nothing to do with a natural disaster. Could have to do with the only 3 locations where you could have the precinct convention had all burned down, right? Or, you know, that's a terrible example, but my point being, I don't think the scope was just, I don't think the scope was around either of us declaring a disaster. Just, I'm going to throw that out there because for frame of reference, I was never thinking of it that I was going to try and pretend to be the governor and declare a disaster. It was just deciding whether we need to declare that we had enough of emergency that we should allow electronic precinct meetings, conventions in that set of precincts in that area for whatever combination of reasons. But that, all that said, we are on the amendment, which is to require that it be mutual agreement of the county chairman and the state chairman. Next up would be Gail Stanek.
I put my hand up before this amendment was proposed. I want to come later.
Oh, okay. Yeah, my apologies. In my order, it showed Tanya first, and then you, and then Mark D'Orazio. Tanya, your hand's still up. That's just to address your amendment.
Yes, sir.
Oh, yes. My apologies. You have the floor.
Thank you. So like I stated before, since there is not, this emergency is not clearly defined, this is nothing personal against county chairs. It is just everybody, you know, has a different definition of emergency, and this is just another layer of checks and balances. And I by no means want to make extra work for the state party chairman, for sure. But I mean, if somebody has a better idea about another layer of checks and you know, the officials committee was kicked around, but then, you know, that's another, you know, 8 people. So I just thought the state party chair would be the good, you know, go-to for an extra layer.
Thank you. Gail, we'll keep you where you are. That brings us on to Mr. D'Orazio.
I have a more of information type question. And as I read 19A, the county chairman can declare a state of an emergency. And on what could a county, how could a county chairman declare a state of an emergency in the county? You know, some county chairman, everything's an emergency. And if you could help me understand this a little bit more, I would appreciate it. And then again, I guess what business would need to be accomplished? Is it a precinct convention, or is it a county convention, or is it an election convention?
So I'm going to address a couple of things that I do know the answer to. First of all, we've got multiple rules here under consideration tonight, and
Okay.
they follow the sequence, right? There's one for precinct convention, then another for county and senatorial conventions, right? So we got 2 different ones. It's the same idea in both cases, and in both cases, you know, we were asked clearly multiple times by members of the SREC, could we please have a backup that allows for electronic meetings for conventions if, God forbid, there's just no way to have an in-person convention? Now, more and more, we're seeing people have in-person conventions and and we were also seeing from experience that an online convention is not a panacea. So, so for both those reasons, I frankly do not expect these rules to be used much, but the request was, please allow a way for some county or some senatorial district convention to be able to hold their meetings electronically should they need. And the working group proposes these two rule changes to allow that in rare cases, as declared, as needed.
Well, we had one significant rule change last time, which took a huge load off of the entire state, was that if our local county was very difficult to deal with, we could go to an adjoining county and hold a convention. And I thought that was a really good, move by the state. And but I like that, but I'm having a hard time with the state of an emergency here and electronic meetings. I know we're doing it now, but I just like people to get together because of the communication factor. 65% of all communication is nonverbal, and we just learn a lot from each other through that nonverbal communication. And so that's just what I wanted to say about that.
Understood. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, real quick.
Yes, Mr. Howe.
The stated emergency is not a state of emergency. It's simply they need to give a reason for why it's an emergency. That's all.
Mr. Chairman, Carla Sisk.
Yes.
SC21, did I unmute?
Yeah, we have a little bit of a line of people for recognition. Mr. Rain's got his hand up, and Mrs. Gebhardt and Ms.
Okay, I'll wait.
Okay, sorry. I see about 6 raised hands. Mr. Rain.
Mr. Chairman, Michael Rain, ST26. I know this would be out of order because of the amendment that has moved, but at some point what I would like to do is move to define an emergency as an event which makes a meeting in person impractical or impossible.
Okay, but you bring up a good point. That's way outside the scope of this particular amendment that's on the floor right now. So the amendment that's on the floor right now is to change it from being the county chairman or the state chairman to being the county chairman and the state chairman.
I understand. I just wanted to put my hand up, make sure that that was noted.
So I'm going to leave your hand up. You'll be after Mrs. Stannard because she had hers first. She also has a not related to this amendment thing, but she was there first. So I'm going to hold both of you for new amendments next. For everyone else, starting with Mrs. Gebhardt, do you have discussion on this amendment to change it from county chairman or state chairman to county chairman and state chairman? Okay, we'll start with Ms. Gebhardt.
I have a point of inquiry having to do with another section, another piece of this. So no.
Okay, then we'll leave you right where you are. Mrs. Evenwell, do you have a discussion on this item?
Yes, I would support this. And from my position of county chair, the only difference I would see is this amendment is trying to provide a remedy if there is an area problem. It's not a stated emergency like COVID, but there could be a problem that arises that makes the precinct convention impractical. But I can see it also that the CEC would give coverage and have more than one person making that declaration. That might be another remedy. As it stands now, as a county chair, I can agree with this.
Thank you. So that's in favor of the amendment. Thank you very much. If you'll, here, I'll go ahead and lower your hand. Thank you. All right, that brings us to Mr. Halverson. Again, discussion on the amendment.
Point of information.
Certainly.
These particular rules, are they not emergency rules because they're not being made to the bylaws, but they're being made to the RPT rules? And those therefore will drop off after this cycle or once we reach convention. Is that true or not?
Well, all of our rules are subject to potential revision at convention. There will be a highlighted set of all the rules amendments we made during this term that will be provided to the Convention Rules Committee. They and the delegates will have the freedom to amend or not amend, to keep or not keep any set of them.
So basically, again, David Halverson, SD12, sorry. So the question then is basically if the convention fails to act, these rules will just, it'll revert to the rule before the convention, back to the original rules.
It's
Or they just won't be added.
The
to
rules
the new
will
set
be
of-
whatever they propose, which may or may not include these.
Right, yeah, because it's new rules every time we have a convention.
Correct.
Okay, all right, thank you very much.
You bet. Okay, so thank you, Mr. Halverson. I'll go ahead and lower your hand. I have no idea who DC is. They didn't answer my question, so I'll move on to Mrs. Glover.
Yes, I wanted to go back and address Tanya, Jill Glover, SD12, wanted to address Tanya's question about the additional layer to the county chair. And so I think I'm doing this correctly, but I wanted to propose that the 2 SRECs for that district be added to that layer.
Okay, my apologies. I got distracted. Could you repeat your request?
Yes. In addressing Tanya's concern about having an extra layer to the county chair, I would like to propose that the 2 SRECs for that Senate district perhaps be added to the county chair.
Okay, so that's still outside the realm.
Okay.
Her amendment was literally to change the word "or" to "and," so your amendment's outside the scope.
Okay.
Or at least I believe it is. I will. Normally, I would ask this privately, but I'll ask Mr. Howe to just confirm or deny whether I was correct on that.
Since we've gone down this road, yes.
Because I guess I'm adding something to the "and."
Yes, that's what I thought. Yeah, excellent, great. Okay, so feel free to leave your hand up, and you can make that amendment later if you'd like. Mr. Covey, thanks. Sorry, I didn't know who you were there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David Covey, SD3, and would like to speak in favor of this amendment. As a county chair, we work closely with our precinct chairs, and there are times when it would be necessary to have, or it could be necessary to have a virtual convention, or risk not having one at all. And then I think having the county chair work with the state chair gives a level of safeguarding it, but also keeps this an efficient process to allow this. And we have to trust our county chairs. We have some great county chairs. Let's let them do their job. Let's get the job done and work with the state. So I would be in favor of this amendment.
Great. Thank you very much, sir. I will lower your hand. Ms. Glover, I'll save you for later. Mr. Ramsey. Sorry, you're on mute.
There we go.
There we go.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman and members. I'm actually going to reluctantly vote against this amendment. I understand the concerns Tanya had. I'm looking at it more in the context of, when might we be in a state of emergency, and would changing it from or to and actually help? And my own opinion is that if you make it more cumbersome to do this, then it will actually not help the party. And just real quickly to Mr. Morales's issue, I think we could clean that up by putting party in between stated and emergency. And that might actually kind of take care of this and or issue as well. I mean, I understand if you put and in there that you've got a level of safeguard, but if you leave it or, to me, that is a more robust way to handle emergencies where you might have to go to an electronic meeting. Let's say we had an emergency where the county chairman could not be reached, i.e. he was out of the country, i.e. He was in a hospital, or he was passed out. I mean, whatever it may be. At that point, then we wouldn't have a mechanism in place. If we leave it the way the work group came up with as or, then that gives us a parallel pathway to deal with whatever the party emergency happens to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ramsey. I'll lower your hand, and that brings us to Mr. Luther.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David Luther, SD 18. I want to speak in opposition to this amendment. First off, in deference to everyone that's spoken already, county chairs actually can do their jobs without the thumb of the state party on them at all times. I do understand that there are some county chairs who may not be always completely on top of their games. But I think for the most part, I think they can determine whether or not they have an emergency in their county that might require them to do this. What I'd like to go further and ask is if Ms. Robertson would consider withdrawing her amendment, because I've heard a number of folks discuss potential ways of making this a little easier to manage. But I think that changing the or to and adding that particular layer is not the most expedient or efficient way of doing that. So I would ask that Ms. Robertson withdraw her amendment to hear from the other folks that have amendments that might solve the problem without inserting this, what I consider to be onerous language. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Robertson, do you have any comment either way?
Well, being that this discussion has gone on quite some time, and I would hate to lose the opportunity to have a safeguard, I'm going to respectfully decline to withdraw.
Understood. Thank you. And that brings us to Mr. Dunning.
Hi, good evening, Randall Dunning, SD 16. I'm going to speak in opposition to this amendment. There's a couple of problems. One problem is if there is no county chairman, and we occasionally have that situation in Texas. Secondly, and a widespread statewide emergency, which would cause large numbers of precincts to have to do this, like what we just went through, the burden upon the state party chairman, I believe, would be crushing. So therefore, I'm going to argue in opposition to this, and will entertain and listen carefully to any other amendments that might come down the line as for maybe a better way to make a safeguard. But in this case, the idea that the state party chairman has to come down to the absolute precinct level is, I think, asking a lot of the attention of the state party chairman. So I'm going to be opposing this.
Thank you, sir. That brings us to Mrs. Knowlton.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Marion Knowlton, SD 19. I agree with Mr. Ramsey, Mr. Luther, and Mr. DeRazio, and all the points that they make. Having been a county chairman myself, while I hope that we would not get to the point we'd have these emergency online meetings, they may come up. But what I'd like to, I will vote against this because I think there's a better way to handle oversight. And I think it would be coming from the bottom up as opposed from the top down, and we might engage the CEC in that oversight. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Barcroft. I don't hear you, Mr. Barcroft. Okay. Mr. Barcroft, I'll come back to you in a second. Hopefully we'll get that worked out, and I'll go to Mr. West.
Mr. Chairman, may I make an amendment to the amendment and just add the word and or?
Oh, Lord.
Without effect.
Yeah, I think I hear Mr. Howe saying what I was thinking I was hearing. Mr. Howe, could you repeat what you were saying?
That amendment will be out of order because it would have the same effect of voting this down.
Good point. Allowing or as an option would be the same as voting against the amendment to change it to require it as and. So that amendment is out of order, but thank you. And it looks like, how about Mr. Barcroft? Can we try once more? Let's see.
Having trouble. Sorry, SD 30 didn't. He's in the chat. It says I unmuted my phone, but wasn't muted through the meeting. He calls the question.
Okay. I've got a call of the question. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. So we've got the question has been called. How about we just do, we'll just do a quick in the chat, yes or no. Actually, no, you know what? You've got those little indicators, yes and no. Just hit the indicator, yes and no, whether you want to call the question.
Oh. We'll call the question.
Quick reminder of where those are. Click on
Yeah, sorry, they're under.
Show up.
Yeah, if you the control line at the bottom of your window has an option for participants. You click on those little indicators of yes, no, and so on, and raise your hand. They're all together. Yes, no, and raise your hand are all in the same panel. And for those of you on by phone, my apologies. I don't know how you do it from the phone, but feel free to just say yes or no from the phone. And all right.
Point of clarification: is this for the amendment or for the?
No, this is for calling the question. And
okay.
Yeah, and we have quite a lot of the votes in. I'm going to call it. The question has been called. Now we'll be voting on the amendment. So you guys can all unclick your yes and no to clear that up. And so now we will be voting on the amendment. And again, this is just an amendment. It only needs a straight majority. So if everybody will reset your little yes and no indicators, that'd be a great way to do this straight majority amendment as well. So actually we'll go ahead and start doing that. Yeah, use your yes and no indicators for this amendment. It just requires a majority for the amendment. And the amendment is to change the word or to and, so that it requires me to agree with the county chair on calling the, on stating the emergency and therefore calling the precinct conventions in that county or in that senatorial district part of that county as applicable via emergency meeting, electronic meeting. Okay, I'm going to call the vote here in 3, 2, 1, and the motion fails. Okay, so the motion has failed. You guys can go ahead and click back on your yes and no. So that amendment fails, and Mrs. Stannert was up first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gail Stannard, SD 15. And I'm going to refer back to Mr. Halverson's point that is this necessary at this time? We will not be having precinct conventions again until 2022. So therefore, I do not think this rule is necessary at this time. The State Rules Committee is going to be meeting in 2 months less, and they will be, I'm sure, addressing this issue. The chairman of the Rules Committee is on the SREC and is on this call, so I'm sure that'll be something that they will be addressing. I want to urge everyone to vote no on this and leave it to the State Convention Rules Committee. Thank you.
Thank you. I do want to address, at least throw out a hypothetical. Okay. So in much of the state, many of the precinct conventions have already been held. However, there are some counties that normally have their precinct conventions right before the senatorial district convention or their county convention. And in much of those counties, it's right before their county convention. And so there, in those counties, it is quite possible that they haven't had either yet. And so so if, God forbid, something was going on and they just could not meet in person, I could see a scenario where they would say, we're going to do them all electronically because we can't do the county convention in person for some really extreme reason in some county. That, again, I'm not arguing for this. I'm explaining why I don't believe it's actually, I don't believe it's purely a moot point. Certainly its need drops every day, but I don't believe it's purely a moot point. Mr. Rain was next up earlier, so I'm gonna stick with him. Mr. Rain.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Michael Rain, SD 26. And I'm sorry, I'm having some difficulty with my phone charging. I move to amend the amendment by inserting at the end, an emergency shall be defined as an event that makes an in-person meeting impractical or impossible. Period.
Okay, Brandon, did you catch all that in the draft?
It's in the chat too.
Okay.
And Mr. Howe, I believe, has it. Thank you.
If I may add a few words at the beginning.
Mr. Rain, would you?
I'm open.
For the purposes of this section, so we're not applying an emergency throughout the rules if there's some other conflicting place.
I'll agree to that change.
Great. So it'll say something in effect of, for the purposes of this section, an emergency is defined as, and then you have the rest of the wording. There we go. For the purposes of this section, an emergency shall be defined as an event that makes an in-person meeting impractical or impossible.
That's correct. And if I can speak on that, the reasoning for it, each county is differently situated. Our local governments are making things either impractical or impossible to meet in some places, but every county is different. It's also intended to prevent a situation where we may have a rogue chairman who decides that as a matter of convenience rather than necessity, that it would be better, in their opinion, to meet electronically. And what this does is it establishes a bar that
Point of
they've
order.
got to pass, which would be whether it is impractical or impossible. Impractical means that you're just having some difficulty finding a location. Impossible means that
Point of order.
it can't be done.
So who's calling the point of order?
Randall Dunning, SD 16. I think we need a second. I don't have any objection to the discussion, but I think we need a second.
Point. Yes, thank you.
Walter West.
Yeah, no, we got
His point is well
plenty of
taken.
seconds. Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Dunning. That was correct. Okay, and Mr. Rain, were you good on finishing your case for your amendment?
I think everybody heard what I said,
Yes.
and I stand by what I said. I will turn it over. I'll go ahead and mute.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, any discussion now on this amendment, adding the sentence defining for the purposes of this section what an emergency is? Mr. Dunning, you're first up. Anything for you on this? Sorry, you're still muted.
There we go. I'm going to take my hand down.
No worries, thank you. Ms. Gebhardt?
Mine is regarding a different question.
Okay, then go ahead and leave your hand up and we'll get back to you next. Ms. Scott? Ms. Scott, do you have discussion on this amendment?
Yes, in regards to the amendment, I may be wrong on this, but I feel like county chairs are elected by the people, the Republicans within that county. So shouldn't they be educated enough to make the decision to hold a county convention in person or electronically based upon that county? And I know that this has nothing to do with this motion, but I think this is going way far out of the scope of what we really need to be focusing on. We're in a pandemic right now, and we do not know what 2 weeks are going to hold from now on and here on out. And I make a motion to strike this entire motion and go back to the original motion and vote on that. I mean, I don't know if that's possible or not, but I think that's the most practical thing to do.
Okay, so in terms of the discussion right now, that would actually just be a argument in favor of voting against this amendment, because that would drop it.
That's my point there. I'm sorry.
No worries.
I think we're going way too far with this. I think that we're in a pandemic and we vote in the county chairs, they're elected officials, Republican elected officials, and you know, that's why we have faith in our county chairs to do what they do. And we should be thankful for all the hard work they put in. And if they want to make the call to have a local or a, you know, one-on-one precinct convention or an electronic precinct convention, then by God, let them do it. That's my idea, but I'll stop talking. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Mr. West.
I apologize. I didn't realize my hand was still up.
No worries. Thank you. Mr. Ramsey?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm going to be voting against this, but I just don't think it adds anything. It adds sort of a definition, but even by saying an event, that means it kind of has to be a specific thing, like a flood. I'm not sure an invisible enemy constitutes a bona fide event. At any rate, I don't think it's necessary. At the very least, I would hope someone would amend event to say something more like situation or circumstances or whatever. But if at that point, then you no longer have anything you've really added to the original language anyway. So I'm not in favor of amending it further. I'm actually speaking against the amendment.
Okay, then we will now take the vote on the amendment, seeing no further discussion on the amendment, unless Mrs. Tanner, looks like you might have just Okay. All right. Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
After the vote.
Okay. All right. Then we are now voting on the amendment. Again, use the yes and no buttons. All in favor, say yes. All opposed, say no. It's a simple majority for the amendment to the amendment. The amendment to the motion, actually, to be precise. So, and the amendment is to add a sentence that says, for the purposes of this section, an emergency shall be defined as an event that makes an in-person meeting impractical or impossible. Yes or no? I'll give another couple of seconds here. Yes or no?
Mr. Chairman, my buttons keep disappearing every time I try to minimize the screen or bring it back. I apologize. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry, guys. I have two monitors and I don't know where those buttons went, but no.
That's all right. There you go.
Or I'm sorry, yes. I vote yes. I'm technically challenged today.
Thank you. Yeah. Feel free. Yeah. Feel free if you can't find it, just type a yes or no in the chat window, and that's okay. So I'm about to close voting in 3, 2, 1. The noes have it. The amendment fails. So we are now back to the motion as originally proposed. Mrs. Tanner.
Mr. Chairman, Gail Stannard, SD 15. My question is for those of us who are in a county where we have SD conventions, would it be advisable to have an SD chairman be able to make the declaration? And if not, then why not? It's a question.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
The working group discussed that and came to the conclusion that because today the county executive committee is the one deciding the time, place, and location, that this rule is making it more expedient to occur. And therefore, instead of changing the authority, which is the county executive committee, you're giving to the leadership of that county executive committee. It was the purpose of giving it to the county chairman, and then the state chairman as essentially the backstop if they were unable to act. Doing it towards the SD convention, we thought added a little bit of confusion, especially in a county like Harris County, where not all participants would know where to be looking for their specific precinct in that manner. Might add to confusion. That's why the recommendation was county chairman or state chairman.
Okay, so that was the logic for the case. You are welcome. You do have the floor. You are welcome to make an amendment should you choose, or if not, we can move on to Mr. McCloskey.
I will think about that. Thank you.
You bet.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
Mike McCloskey, Senate District 5.
Yeah.
I think the words that are giving people heartburn in this are the words as declared by. So I would like to move that the words as declared by are stricken. And then after the word state chairman, then you would have to say, to make the sentence make sense, you would have to add the words may schedule, a precinct convention, and strike the words may be conducted. And then that will make sense. And then I think that's the problem is because the sentence as written reads as though the county chairman and the state or the state chairman declare the emergency. The emergency is declared by a governmental authority. So that's my motion, is to amend as declared by be removed, may schedule be added, and the words may be conducted be removed.
Okay, so the end result of your amendment would have it read, in the event of a stated emergency, the county chairman or state chairman may schedule a precinct convention through use of electronic meeting services designated by the county chairman.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, that is your motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There is a second. So we have the motion and a second. Mr. McCloskey, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I think a lot of the discussion that's been happening today has been the language. It's just, it tends to give the impression that the county chairman or state chairman are the folks who declare emergencies. We know that those emergencies have been declared through elected authorities. And I think if we correct this wording, I think it takes care of a lot of the concerns I've been hearing today.
Okay, great. Thank you. Discussion on the amendment. Mrs. Gebhardt?
Sorry, mine has to do with a question related to something else.
No worries. Thank you. Mr. Dunning.
Hi, Randall Dunning, SD 16. I'd ask Member McCloskey if he might be willing to consider changing the word schedule to authorize. Because I don't think we want the county chair, the various chairmen actually scheduling the precinct convention.
Mr. Chairman, I agree to that.
Mr. Chairman, if I can respond to that.
Yes, sir.
You actually would have the county chairman scheduling these precinct conventions regardless of how it was conducted. We did that in the last one.
Okay, I withdraw. I withdraw.
Keep it as is then.
Great, thank you. Okay, so Mr. Dunning, I'm gonna lower your hand. That brings us to Mr. Dunham.
Yes, I want to speak in favor of this amendment. I think it makes it a little clearer and kind of simplifies it myself. Thank you.
Great, and so that brings me to Mr. Morales.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Roy Morales, SD 13. Point of information. Under phase 1 and phase 2 or phase 3, would we still be considered in a state of emergency?
I believe the phases and the state of emergencies are disparate. They're not necessarily identically tied. So for example, we have a lot of business that we're moving to phase 2 and phase 3, but the last declaration of the governor was to extend the state of emergency through through middle of next month. So I haven't seen a tight connection between the two.
Okay, so therefore we're still under a state of emergency, which means that either the chairman or the county chair may call one at this time.
Correct. Which is, again, back to the original summary. The whole point of this was at the request of quite a few SREC members was to provide for a backup for if the conventions couldn't be held in another county, if the conventions couldn't be moved, if we didn't have enough time, could we provide for an electronic method? And that's what this rule is for.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mrs. Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a point of inquiry. Is the original intent of this amendment, the original amendment as proposed in the call, is that intent to allow an avenue for chairs to solve whatever specific problems they have? Or are we trying to restrict things? Are we trying to constrict their options? Because we've sort of run the gamut so far in our conversations and our amendments.
The point of this effort has always been to provide a backup in the event in-person conventions could not happen this year because of the very unusual scenario we all find ourselves in this year.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yes, ma'am. My pleasure. Mr. Ramsey.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members, I'm going to be voting against this amendment. I understand the intent, but this changes the this changes the proposed rule change entirely. And we've had this discussion before on a number of different issues. Do we want the government tying the hands of the party? And I suggest, especially after what we've seen the last 2 months, that's not a good road to go down. If we go with Mr. McCloskey's amendment as stated, we are essentially deferring that ability to declare a party emergency to only elected officials. And as we see right here in Harris County, that doesn't usually produce very good results. Mostly because of that and the fact that it completely changes what this rule change does. And I'm very concerned with unintended consequences in that sense. I'm going to be voting no. Thank you.
Great. Okay, any further discussion on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman, Josh
Yes.
Flynn, Secretary, if we could, before we start another vote, that we clear the yes or no's from the chat. Thank you.
I just did that. Yep.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah, I just figured out how to do that. Now, the only downside, people whose hands had been up, which were all leftover hands for other topics. My apologies. There were a couple. Your hands are now down, so go ahead and add your hands up. But we will now take the vote on the amendment. So if you are in favor of the amendment, please click yes. If you are opposed to the amendment, please click no. And we will see how this goes. Okay, going to be closing the voting here in 3, 2, 1. The noes have it. So the amendment fails. So we'll revert back to the original motion. Any further discussion on the original motion? Mr. Ramsey.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would, whoops, I lost my screen. Hey, there it is. I would move one final amendment, hopefully. Don't shout me down too much. And that's to insert the word party between the words stated and emergency in the first line.
Second.
So we have a motion, we have a second. If you're welcome to speak to the amendment if you would like.
Nope, that's fine.
Great. So the motion is to amend the motion by adding the word party. So that it now says stated party emergency instead of just saying stated emergency. Any discussion on the item? Mrs. Stanner, you're actually on a different issue, right? Or my apologies. I'll Mr. Green.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I raised my hand before the amendment, to the amendment. I was going to call the question.
Okay. You'll be up next, Mr. McCloskey.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Mike McCloskey, Senate District 5. A point of inquiry, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Have you declared a state of emergency for the party at any time during the pandemic?
No, I haven't.
So by adding this amendment, you would have to declare one in order for any county or any precinct to be able to hold a convention through electronic means. Would that be correct assessment?
Yeah, either I would or the local county chairman would.
Do we have a process for doing that?
If I may,
I don't see how this amendment makes sense. I mean, there are people that do declare emergencies. There are declared emergencies all over Texas, but we as a party, and as far as I know, no county and you have not declared an emergency to authorize this to take place. So I will be voting no because it doesn't make sense.
Noted. Thank you. And that brings us to Mr. Edwards.
Mr. Chairman, JT Edwards, SD 11. Number one, just at a point of information, I don't know if you cleared off the yeses and nos yet in preparation for the vote.
Oh, I did not
number-
yet. The
Okay,
problem,
and number two-
yeah, if everybody will just clear your own, if I clear them all, I'm gonna clear all the hands, so.
Okay. And number two, I like to call the question.
Yeah, well, Mr. Rain had just, he beat you to that, but,
Okay.
actually, unless you're calling the question on the amendment.
I'm calling a question.
On the amendment, okay, all right, so we've had one favor, one opposed, okay. If you would, clear your votes or be comfortable with your votes, your call. We're gonna have the vote on the amendment to add the word party. All in favor, click yes. All opposed, click no.
Is this calling the question, Mr. Chairman?
Oh, my apologies. Yes, sorry. This is calling the question on the amendment to add the word party. So all in favor of calling the question, say yes. All opposed to calling the question, say no. And we'll close the voting in 3, 2, 1. The ayes have it. The question is called. Clear your votes now. And now we are going to vote on the amendment. And now we are voting yes or no on whether to add the word party that now changes it to saying stated party emergency. So yes would add the word party, no would not add the word party. Okay, I'm going to call the vote in 3, 2, 1. The noes have it. The amendment fails. We are back to the original motion as proposed. And we will go to actually Mr. Rain.
Mr. Chairman, Michael Rain, SD 26. I call the question on the main amendment.
So we have a call for the question on the main motion. This will be a yes or no vote.
Mr. Chair, I had my hand up before and I wasn't recognized.
Oh, okay. My apologies.
I had just a point of inquiry. I was just wondering about why the precinct convention is in a singular form. I'm not aware of a county that has just one precinct in it. And would there be a time when a singular precinct convention would need to be held electronically by a stated emergency? Should we consider rewording that to a county precinct conventions? Or I'm not making a motion. I'm just asking the question. I'm just inquiring about why that's in the singular form.
Yeah.
May?
Yes, please.
It's in the singular because it may not be the case throughout a county, and allows the county chairman or the state chairman maximum flexibility to accomplish precinct conventions.
Okay, but you're the way that you had defined what an emergency was seemed pretty broad. And my concern would be that almost anything could be considered an emergency, that a singular precinct could then be allowed to hold an electronic meeting, maybe even after other precinct conventions have held theirs. I mean, I'm just trying to, play devil's advocate a little bit. That's my concern.
Yes, that is a possibility. And in fact, the rules changes we made at a previous meeting do allow the relevant authority to call precinct conventions for different dates and times and places up until the time of the senatorial district or county convention. So your concern of some could happen before or after others, that actually is in fact the case based on previous rules changes we made.
Right, but I guess what I'm saying is in a particular county, you're saying that a particular county chairman can declare a precinct convention singularly can be declared an emergency and conduct theirs individually through electronic meetings. That's just my concern. I just want to make sure that we're not, giving deference to precinct conventions that maybe, I mean, what's an emergency? So, I can't be there because my wife's having a baby. I mean, what could be construed as an emergency? And if that would be a concern, having this be a singular term.
Okay, so we've got the call for the question. My apologies for not having seen and called on you before that. Do you have a motion to make, or did you just want to present the question to the body, what you've done?
No, I was just asking that question. Thank you.
You bet. Okay. Before we have the vote on calling the question, the only other person who had their hand raised was Ms. Breda.
I'm good.
Great. Okay, so then we have there was call for the question from Mr. Rain on the motion. Is there a second for calling the question?
Second.
Okay. Then now we're voting on calling the question. All in favor of calling the question, say yes. All opposed, say no. And we'll close voting in 3, 2, 1, and the ayes have it. We have called the question. So now we will have voting on the motion as originally proposed. And this is a rule change. So this is a roll call vote. So for this, we need you to type the word yes or the word no into the chat window and make sure your chat window is addressed to everyone so we can see it. And if your chat is addressed to everyone, go ahead and type, yeah, sorry. Yeah, we'll just go ahead and we'll do them all. This does require 2/3 since it is a rules change.
I don't know how to do what he's asking me to do.
That's okay. You can just tell me what it is you'd like to, yes or no.
What do you want to do? I need to put yes. Oh, right there. Where?
Okay. Yeah, you can type yes.
I got to spell it out.
Ms. Fredo in the
yes.
Freda in the chat window, and no.
Where's the chat?
There we go.
Roy Morales, SD13.
Yes.
I vote no. My chat's not working right now.
Understood. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, Marion Stanko, District 26.
Glenn.
My power is out, so I vote yes.
Thank you, ma'am, and sorry about the power being out.
Thank you.
Okay, it looks to me like most of the voting is ending, and it also looks to me like we have a very solid 2/3 majority in favor. So the motion passes as presented. Voting is closed. Thank you all very much. It passed. All right, so now on to the next one. Mr. Roller is back with us, and we had skipped him to do this because of his phone going out because of storms in his area. Mr. Roller, are you back with us?
Yes.
Wonderful. If you wouldn't mind, please giving the audit report real quick. The audit committee report, my apologies. Did we lose you? Mr. Roller,
Can you hear me now?
There we go. Now I can hear you. Yes.
Okay. I don't know what happened here, but so I'm reading off the letter from Ashley and Associates, just to go over the responsibility, is why they do the audit for us. And it says our responsibility is described by the professional standards is to form and express an opinion about whether the financial statements that have been prepared by management with your oversight are presented fairly in all material respects in conformity with the cash basis of accounting. Our audit of the financial statements does not relieve you or management of your respective responsibilities. Our responsibility is prescribed by professional standards is to plan and perform our audit to obtain reasonable rather than absolute assurance about whether the financial statements are free of material misstatement. And then lastly, on this page, we are also responsible for communicating significant matters related to the audit that are, in our professional judgment, relevant to your responsibilities in overseeing the financial reporting process. And then just one other highlight, there was no significant difficulties encountered during the audit as far as working with management, and they pointed that out, and they had a very good relationship. The opinion, the bottom line, of course, we can all look at this and probably already have. This is the opinion from the auditors. In our opinion, the financial statements referred to above present fairly in all material respects the assets and liabilities arising from cash transactions of the State Republican Executive Committee as of December 31st, 2019 and 2018, and its revenue collected and expenses paid during the years then ended in accordance with the cash basis of accounting described in Note A. With that would conclude my report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eller. If anyone has a question, that'd be fine. Okay. Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Eller. Thank you to everyone who served. Jason Ross, Chuck Branch, thank you for both of you also serving on the Financial Committee. And Ms. Glover, you have a question.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Jill Glover, SD 12. I actually had 3 questions about the financials, if I can ask.
Okay, you can ask them, but I'm not, remember, we're not the treasurer.
Okay, no worries.
Okay.
Okay, my first question is on the Audit Committee letter, page 5. There's an audit adjusting entry in the amount of $20,458 to void a check and to deposit those funds back into the primary cash account. I was just curious who the payee was on that check and if it needed to be reissued for payment of a liability in 2020.
I'm sorry, I can't answer that question. That Kyle might have to, if he's on, could possibly answer it, or John Albee could answer that, but I don't have that information.
If Kyle is on, he's welcome to answer it. If not, I can.
Okay.
That is the check from us to the Secretary of State.
Okay.
For a refund of additional filing fees that we got that we didn't need to cover our primary expenses, and they didn't cash the check. So the accountants had us void it, redeposit funds. We are going to reissue the check. It is going to go back out, which is why we haven't talked about it.
Okay. So that will be out of the 2020 funds then. I mean, out of the 2020.
It'll be written in 2020.
If you remember our last cash report, though, was it like $4.5 million?
Right.
Voiding this check will bump it, so it'll go up $500,000.
Right.
And then we'll issue the check. It'll go right back down.
Okay.
There will be no difference.
Okay. Very good. My next question is on major donor revenues. The $3.2 million during 2019 looks like to be an all-time record for an off year, which is excellent. I was curious what the source of those off-year major donations were and if they will be repeated for 2020 or if they're an advance of what otherwise we would normally get in a presidential year.
Well, we've never before And we've got, you can all see this. We've got audits on we got financial statements summarized up on our website at texasgop.org/audits. If you look on our financial statements, you go down to page 6, for example. At the bottom of, well, on the paper, it's called page number 4, but that's because there's 2 pages of other stuff. But it is the statements of revenues collected, expenses paid, and changes in net assets on a cash basis for the years ending December 31st, 2019 and 2018. It shows that our increase in net assets for 2019 was $3.2 million, $242,368,000. There is no other year in history that we have where the party gained that much in net assets ever. And that's precisely because we were doing exactly what I've been telling everybody we were going to do for a year and a half now, which is build up for the biggest fight we've ever had for November 2020.
So do you anticipate that will be repeated then for 2020? That amount will be repeated for 2020?
Well, no, if you'll remember, the budget you all approved had us bringing in around $2 million in major donors this year, not 3.3. Well, not whatever it was, 3.225. So
do you think that amount is it's like in advance of what we would normally get in a presidential?
Oh, no, actually, if you look, 2018, that's an election year. We actually brought in $4.5 million.
Mm-hmm.
And the 3.2 is absolutely a slam dunk record for a non-election year. This year, I fully expect that we will have brought in a whole lot more than that $4.5 million that we brought in last year. It all depends on how the election goes and how much election activity we do. But our budget for our core operations is only $2 million. Now, we're going to do a lot of victory efforts, and depending on what we do in those victory efforts, that could be millions.
Okay. And then my final question is, in 2018, we had $2,650,000 in other income. And I was just curious what that was, because that was such a larger amount than what we had in either off year.
Right, because that was an election year. If you go back to 2016 and 2014, you'll see much smaller numbers.
Right.
The numbers have been dramatically bigger since I've become chairman, but you will see that the numbers are much bigger in election years than they are non-election years.
So do you know where that other income came from? That $2 million?
I could go look to see where it was from in 2018. For what it's worth, that 2018 number, that was reported on last year's audit. You've had that number for a year now.
Okay. Because it was something different. It wasn't in the major donor category. It's in the category of other income. So that's what I was trying to figure
No,
out.
my point is the 2018 financial report, you would have gotten that with last year's audit.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You bet. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much. Now we'll go back to the next motion, which is the rule on. Here we go. Yeah, to permit electronic county and senatorial district conventions, it's adding RPT Rule 27B. Now would be the time I would entertain a motion to adopt this suggestion from the working group.
So moved. Randy Dunning, SD 16.
Thank you, Mr. Dunning. Is there a second?
Second from JT Edwards, SD 11.
Thank you, sir. So there's a motion and a second. And Mr. Dunning, would you like to speak to your motion?
I think it's self-explanatory. I'm moving to move this and put this up for consideration.
Thank you.
In particular, it's somewhat important to SD16 because we have had difficulty finding a venue in the course of the current events.
Thank you. Mr. Morales. Colonel Morales.
Mr. Chairman, Roy Morales, SD 13. I'd like to make an amendment to this motion.
Okay.
The amendment would be second line after the word, temporary convention chairman. I would like to add and SREC members.
Okay. Is there a second for this amendment?
A second.
Second.
Mr. Morales, are you, Mr. Howe was clarifying and that we're referring to the SREC members of the relevant district. Is that?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. So we've got an amendment, motion, and a second. Mr. Morales, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. My concern is that if we have temporary convention chairmen and SRECs that aren't quite on the same sheet of music during this pandemic, my concern that we may disenfranchise some of our delegates that they may not have access to the computer, they may not have access to an electronic means. We're taking away their opportunity to be delegates. I'm concerned that my SD chair may go to this directly, even though we do have a location, time, and day. And I just believe that the SREC members will be able to provide more guidance on such a serious situation. If you have no problems with your current SD chairs, then there's no problem adding those words. But if you do, this gives us a little bit more, I believe in the last amendment where Tanya was trying to look for checks and balances, this gives us a check and balance in this situation.
Thanks, sir. I see a couple other hands up. Mr. Rain.
Mr. Chairman, Michael Rain, SD 26. I'm having internet and phone problems. I'm not able to read the motion on my phone. Would you mind reading it, please?
Not at all. Okay, so the motion with the proposed amendment right now is in the event of a stated emergency, as declared by the temporary convention chairman, and then the amendments adds and SREC members of that district, a county or senatorial district convention may be conducted through the use of electronic meeting services designated by the temporary convention chairman. In the event of a county or senatorial district convention, in the event a county or senatorial district convention is held electronically, the electronic meeting must allow for the real-time sharing and viewing of convention documents, including the current motion, any amendments to that motion, and any reports that the convention considers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
By the way, this seems as good a time as any to say thank you all for your patience as we work through online meetings and the unique challenges that come with them all. So thank you all for doing that. Mr. McCloskey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike McCloskey, Senate District 5. This amendment gives me concern. What are we paralyzed if one SREC member agrees and one SREC member disagrees? What do we do? It's just like that we have a process in place if our SREC members want to choose different people to the temporary committee, that you as the chairman are the arbiter of who the two choices are. I could see a potential where one SREC member could agree and one might disagree. What is the alternative? I find this very problematic. So I don't see a solution to that, and I will be voting against because I don't see this as practical.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no further discussion on this amendment, we'll go ahead and vote on the amendment as an amendment to the motion. And the amendment is to add the words "and SREC members of that district." The motion is to add those words. All in favor, click on the yes. All opposed, click on the no. Straight majority. This is yes or no on the amendment to add the words "and SREC members of that district." Okay, I'm going to close the voting here pretty shortly. Yes, in favor of adding the words "and SREC members of that district." No, opposed to adding those words. And let's see, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, and 1, 2, 3, 4. The noes have it. Okay, so the amendment fails, and now we're back to the motion as proposed. Mr. Rayner, is that a fresh hand?
Yes, it is. I call the question.
Okay. Seeing no other hands raised without objection, we'll skip the voting on calling the question and just go to the vote. Seeing no objection, we will now do the roll call vote on the motion as proposed, permitting electronic county and senatorial district conventions. Yes or no, type yes or no into the chat window. This does take a 2/3 vote and is a roll call vote. Yes or no. It's yes or no. I'm gonna have to take a look. It doesn't seem obvious enough to me to tell whether it's 2/3 or not. Let's see here. Okay, yes or no. Okay, yeah, voting is closed, and it does appear to me that it passes and passes with the necessary 2/3. Thank you all very much for that. And again, thank you. This is very important work as we make the adjustments to make sure that we can proceed to a safe and great state convention in Houston in the middle of July. I appreciate all of you and your input. Have a fantastic evening and week. God bless you. Go get some rest.
Thank you, everyone.
All have a good
Thank
night.
you,
Stay
Chairman.
safe in the
Thank you,
storms.
everyone.
Good night.
Say prayers for Alan West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.